Hey there guys. Hi. Today is Monday, 13, yes, of January 2020. And I'm back out here. My voice may be a bit tricky, but that's just because I just had yogurt. So, nothing going on other than, general, all over the place and tired and not really completely sure about the words because there's been several things going on at the same time, as per the norm, and it's getting boring to say that always. I want to be, in control again of my life, but it doesn't really look like it's gonna happen very soon. So we're just gonna try and get some kind of a, you know, um, presentation or summary of what it is that's been going on, and we will see from there where we get. I'm a bit torn between the two different subjects that I've been working with and on during the weekend and all of last week. I've been very busy with astrology and my transits, like I already reported Thursday, that is. And actually, looking back at that, I think that most of what I've said in that video actually still is correct, or I still believe is correct. However, there's been quite a bit of a hitch with the astrology, in the sense that in order to, figure out my transits, I have used different software compared to what I use online, like the Astro theme website that I talked about last week, where you can actually go to any given time and date and location that you want, and that's quite reliable. It turns out that Astro theme software and the astro.com software, it looks like they're mostly the same or very compatible anyway. So, however, the software I used for my own chart and my husband's chart at first, it turns out it's not completely reliable. So that was a bit of a shock. That came out actually Friday, so after the vlog that I'd made, and actually most of what I've like I just said, most of what I've talked about in my vlog on Thursday about the house cusps and all that is still, it works the same, only the degrees for our house cusps are really about 10 degrees away from where I thought they were at first. That's quite a big jump. And only because I went and sort of got our data from astro.com this time in order to check what came out of there. And it turns out that Astro Theme and astro.com actually give me the same data for my ascendant and, all the rest of that, all the house cusps and the degrees and all that. The planets are the same. It is the tiny detail of the actual house cusps where you get into trouble with this different type of software. So most of what I've worked with, so far, has always been planetary positions, synastry between planets and things. And whenever something caught my interest, like for example the black moon or any of those positions, lunar positions, I tended to, whenever I was really interested in that, especially with respect to, charts of other people, so synastry between charts, right? Then I would go to astro.com always, anyway, to check what their data were. So I don't think that 15 years worth of astrology has gone down the drain just like that. It's not that dramatic, thank goodness. But I had to make a new list of my house cusps and sort of make my chart again of this, the chart that I made last week. And actually, it's good practice, and I had to just go through it all again. And what with other things going on at the same time, with this Saturn-Pluto conjunction that we've had yesterday, This is my new chart that I've made. Sort of like a year-long, how do you put that? Actually, it's all the years between 1960 and 2020 are in here. Yes, more or less. I think that is 20 is right here, and 1960 starts over here, okay? And 1966 is over there where I am born, and this is my husband's bar, the top there, and then I'm underneath that. And so we progress through life, and as you can see, there's little orange blobs. Those are Uranus transits or the move of Uranus to a next sign. Not all of them, but quite a number of them. Black is Pluto and blue is Neptune. That's it. So 3 planets and those many years, and then seeing what actually happens. And there, because the actual ascendant hasn't changed, and the only thing that has changed is the degrees for the ascendant and all the other house cusps, right? So instead of having like 11 degrees or something, I will have 2 or 3 degrees, for example. So what you get is the same kind of events, the same kind of transits, the same stories, the same, only the moment of the transit is earlier in the years each time. The whole thing just kind of shifts like that, and in some cases like a couple of months or even a year, up to a year or so, backwards in time. Basically everything happens earlier than I had assumed in the first chart, in the other one, okay, which I'm going to throw away as soon as I'm done talking here, because I don't need 2 of those, and I don't need to see this anymore. It was just also a way of figuring out how to do this, basically. So astro.com and Astro Theme are reliable for us to, work with our natal chart, get your natal. You can fill in the astro.com is a very big website with loads of data, but you can easily, for free, get your own birth chart. And if you're beginning in astrology and this kind of stuff just itches in your brain and just makes little sparks go off all over, like it is for me, then astro.com is definitely your go-to place. However, on astro.com, you cannot jump to a year. You cannot go to 1963 just like that. And then see what happens from 63 onwards for as many years. For that, the Astro Theme website is perfect. So there you go. There's that. I have looked at our lives yesterday evening, just before the actual infamous conjunction between Saturn and Pluto, actually, to which I will return in a minute. Husband and I actually got to look at this stuff, and husband has confirmed quite a number of items also from his own life, moves, house moves, his father leaving the family, and other such similar, dramatic items in his life. And of course I knew my own already, quite a number of them. And it looks like there's really 4 things. It's very vague, okay? For me, still, it doesn't look like a planet moves into a new house and boom, you get this effect, or you get predictably this type of effect. It looks to me like there is a lot of cooperation between the 3 forces of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And that's fascinating to me. It's very scary also, because a lot of drama is in here. So it makes it very uncomfortable to look at. I just basically did want to go chuck it all in the fireplace and go off and have pizza somewhere, because, never mind. But this is me. I want to study things. And the one thing that struck me most of all, I think, is that whenever Uranus moves into your ascendant, whenever one of those three planets moves into your ascendant, that means trouble. In particular, when it's Uranus, because Uranus will upset any balance that is there or that you feel is there or that you need. So then Neptune in particular, whenever it moves into a next house, whichever one that is, can be third, fourth, fifth house, any of those, that seems to upset the balance quite a bit. And in the case of my husband, it had a lot to do with his health also, and so on and so forth. So each time, these are not risk-free moments. These are moments where everything that we rely on in our lives that's supposed to work, but it doesn't really, because you're basically looking for other things in your life and you're looking to expand your consciousness and you are looking for growth, then yeah, this is what will happen. The balance will get upset, and it's a bit confrontational, but it's a very interesting exercise to do this. And basically, the Pluto into ascendant business, for example, in the case of my husband, it came into his ascendant in 73. That is 13 years after he was born. So for the first 13 years of his life, Pluto was in 12, the 12th house. And it's like, somehow, it's very difficult to describe really, but it's like Pluto has been gathering some type of harvest. There's some type of a process happening in that 12th house. And then when Pluto comes into the first house, into the ascendant, it's like it suddenly comes into daylight, and it has a lot to do with vulnerability for both of us, because 73, 74 was the period for both of us where our parents divorced, and we came into, as children, as young people, into situations that were very much out of our control, and often dramatic and even threatening, in many ways. And for me, it happened just a bit later, this Pluto going to ascendant shift, this transit. But it was the same. It was only for me, it was like I came into a period of moving house again and again with my mother, whereas before that I'd spent a period of time with family or in this foster home that I talked about a couple of times already. And there for a short while, for a year or so, even though my parents were in the middle of their divorce and everything was very problematic for them, I actually had a predictable kind of life, for quite a consistently predictable life. And after that, we started moving house a couple of times on and off, and in the end, a couple of years later, we moved to the south of Spain for a year, and then to France, and on and on. And it's not, what basically strikes me coming away from this now is that I have been on this path of expansion and consciousness, integrating consciousness basically. That's really my manual, if there's such a thing as a manual of this life on this end. It is about integrating consciousness, all sorts of levels of self basically that have to become a whole. Husband had a actual question for the period before we had our bankruptcy with our company that we were in at the time. And this is going back to 2008 to 12 basically. There are Uranus transits in that period, and he wanted to know whether you could see from this that we as a couple didn't communicate as well. And so I had to go and think about that. And it turns out that this Uranus position, especially towards 2010, was on my black moon for quite a while. And these are slow moving transits, slow moving processes. So for quite a long time, and at this point, I had to go back and look at that and remember how I felt exactly. And that is very uncomfortable, I tell you, still. But yay, YouTube, I'm here and you're here to share this with me. Thank you, because that helps quite a bit. Dear God. Yeah, uncomfortable to remember how incredibly threatened and insecure I used to feel back then. Uranus on black moon, and there's probably a lot more to know about this black moon in very early in the 6th house, and whatever that means, I'm not even completely sure yet. I first had to figure out the actual numbers, and then from there on I can sort of start to fill in bits and pieces and make sense of things. And but at that moment, how I felt, I was surrounded by people who had all sorts of basic assumptions, but also routine and knowledge and what do you call that? People who are, at least they seem very confident in in their priorities, in how you go about things, especially socially with other people. They were really part of a group, of a network, and I wasn't. It was so bloody uncomfortable. And so that's one example of me having to go back in time, having to look at this, also because husband asks me, why did we feel like it was almost the end of our relationship then? And he had his own problems, and that was way before he discovered, or we discovered, anything about his womb twin survivor story or any of the other things. He still had to have his stomach operation. He's had, during that period, especially 2010 to 2012, he's had several times where he had like like an inflammation in the ulcer in his stomach, and nobody knew, and he didn't know what was going on in there, and we didn't even go to see a doctor. He just lay on the couch for a couple of days, and then it would all pass, and he would feel better, and it will subside, and it would sort of calm down again. And so he was used to doing things by himself always. I was used to nobody caring or helping me, and coming back to this whole self-integration, consciousness integration business, which I think is the whole and single point and clue to this whole everything, all of this basically, is that I now, looking back, I can see who I was then, and there was a significant piece missing, which I kind of collected in 2012 during this regression that I did, a sort of a hypnosis regression that I participated in on YouTube with Brian Weiss, who's a regression soul retrieval therapist who's still out there. I just ran into this somewhere in August, in the end of August 2012, and I was completely desperate. My sense of isolation, of being unable to function as a living, feeling human being. I was so entirely made out of cardboard. It was, and people had told me that, more or less literally, quite a number of times. My boss at the job I was at told me that, I couldn't engage with people emotionally and things like that. So it was, and on the other hand, I didn't know how else to do things. I didn't know how to make contact And then the regression happened. I encountered during this regression a person who looked not so much like the way I look physically, but who felt very familiar. I had never felt anything like that ever. And then after that, for 3 whole years, I basically sort of gravitated around this sensation and this emotion, but I didn't know how to make contact with that. I didn't have a soul regression or soul retrieval specialist or shaman or anyone close by that I could ask for help. Or it was basically at the end of those 3 years that because I was still desperate enough and still feeling like I should be able to communicate with this person, and is it really a part of myself? I didn't really know anything other than the context that it was all given to me. Okay, so I sort of assumed that this was actually a soul part of me, apparently a part of consciousness that really belongs with this part of consciousness that is, that's lived in this body for, 53 years. At that time, 48. So because this is 2015 that I'm talking about, so it's 4.5 years ago now, that I actually had, I basically asked a spirit guru that I knew of, asking Sai Baba or some such, it wasn't Sai Baba, but it was somebody else that I was familiar with through my work, that I trusted. Can you please sort of link us back together, because I have no clue I am still in this void person. I am in this personality over here that is looking back now to this person that I used to be, and I'm looking at my series of years again here. I was only a very narrow set of programs that ran based on the way I grew up. Moving house all the time, parents who were miserable, no emotional connection, hardly ever. Also with my mum, very little, because my mum had her own problems and she tended to isolate herself from me as well. So this is all very tough stuff. And I was, to all intents and purposes, I think, looking back, I functioned in a top layer in my mind, basically, I used to believe in reason, in logic, to quite an extent, and that was it. There was no me in any of it, really, and it makes no sense. And I'm I'm trying to explain how you can work, how you can live like that, because I loved nature. I loved being outside. I loved traveling. There were quite a number of programs, little bits of programming that were sort of recognizably human. I wasn't violent. I wasn't aggressive or necessarily, I think. I was defensive, yes, because I felt always really vulnerable and really threatened. So, and incapacitated. I felt incapacitated. That's the word, basically, that sort of, I didn't feel depressed. I didn't used to normally feel depressed. I had periods, especially in those infamous 20, from 2008 onwards, those years, but also before, actually, when my mother was still alive, and afterwards, when she'd passed away. Actually, when she'd passed away in 95, after that, there were a couple of really good years, and Uranus was in Aquarius then, which is a good sign for Uranus to be in. So back to that, okay? And then that's when we did in those years, from 96, 7, 8 onwards, so 4 or 5 years or so, we did a lot of traveling. We did a lot of exploring and camping throughout Europe, basically husband and I did a lot of painting. What you've seen on my channel on about oil painting, especially the older paintings. All of that I made in that period of time. So I was feeling really expressive, and it makes no sense to me either. How I was so expressive, and I could be so I don't know, clever, I guess, about it. Portraying things, it's a talent that I just inherited, and I didn't. I was relevant as a maker of those things back in that time, but I couldn't be that person with other people ever. I think that's the big. So that's where the incapacitatedness, if that's a word, used to come in, right? The moment when it was inside my own life, it was fine. I could write, I could make things, I was always busy fiddling with things, And then with the soul retrieval, what I keep referring to as my soul retrieval, I found this other part of me sort of intact and alive. And that's the part that was capable of making contact with other people on an actual emotional level. So since 2015, I've been able to sort of, and that's why I talk about integration all the time, because it isn't about one process or the other. It's about all of it, really, integrating into each other. So hence, this is all rather, all this is back to, sometimes periods of time where you were helpless. And if I remember things from my childhood or when I was like 10 years old or so, and then feeling helpless or things being really difficult for me, that's something I don't find so hard to accept now. It is the later things after 30, between 30 and 48. That's the period where I have done a lot of growing, and I have done a lot of, also every day I was trying, but it didn't feel so good. And I was, it wasn't like anybody could be blamed for anything. And if there's one element out of this whole story that I've come back to again and again, especially recently, is that I had a huge problem with people when they were unhappy. That was like a death sentence for me. So this is very sensitive material for me. I'm not even tearing up though, because I've been through this in the recent month or two. I find it still very difficult to live or interact with people when they're stressed out because of, things. I already find that a bit difficult, but it's like I react badly to the stress because underneath is quite often unhappiness or imbalance or some form of unresolved whatever it is for them. And it's not that I can see all that or necessarily nowadays, maybe, but back in the day, all I could feel was terror at their, and it's basically the way my mum used to be. I have plastered my mum's image over the top of everybody else, and it was very, I'm lucky that I'm still here, and the brain is doing it. The brain's actually also still doing the talking right here. And you people out there, some of you are actually watching this, which is like, yay, a marvel to me. But it turns out that I'm coming into this current of humanity that we are all part of, basically. And I think that's bloody amazing, especially if I look back at all the details of the things. So I think that concludes my transits episode for now. I have done one other astrological thing, which I think might be fun for some people if you're interested in that type of stuff. This is basically the astro theme chart for, And never mind the details, because you can see this is all scribbled over and written over and so on and so forth. But it's the type of chart that you can get on astrotheme.com, where this is the date where my husband and I hooked up, when we became a couple, basically. So we got engaged, if you like. Not officially, just we came together, right? And so I did a chart for that. And there are actually two things that I can say about this. The funny thing is that you can look at this as having planets in different positions here and there that aspect our own planets. So there's a relationship between the relationship and us, each of us, separately or even together. You can also, which that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? You can have like, okay, so there's this moon here and in the relationship, and that interacts with either of us in this or that way, for example, or a Mercury or any of it. On the other hand, you can also look at this as a separate person, as the chart of our relationship, giving for the two of us all sorts of personality traits for the relationship, separately, as if it were a creature of its own, which it is, obviously. And that was a lot of fun to go into. And we actually, I actually found this useful, because just one short example here, or maybe two little examples. This chart, this personality of our relationship, has Mars in Aries. So to me, that means that in this relationship, although we are both incredible dreamers, and let me try to put you over like this. Maybe I can not have this spot over there from the, because that's bothering me basically. Mars in Aries means in this relationship, there's a lot of activity. There's actually a lot of forward movement, and incredibly, it's a very active relationship. The other thing about this relationship is that the ascendant is, to all likelihood, a Cancer. And this is a relationship that has looked for a home for a very long time. And now, as I sit here speaking to you over the past year and a half, which has done me the world of good, and sharing with the world basically all my subjects and things that I think about, and the processes we go through, and the discussions we have, and the healing processes we have, all that, it turns out that in the expanded and integrated state of affairs that we are in more and more, both of us, our relationship is finding its home. Oh, it's amazing. It's bloody awesome, and it's lovely. And so this one's staying in my little packet of intel here. And otherwise, the list of numbers and a couple of recent years with house cusps that are a bit different, and a couple more empty pages. And that's it. And this has been a really interesting couple of weeks, couple of days, basically working on this. And the other thing that, of course, I still have to mention now, we're 33 minutes in. Okay, what is it, 35? No, I can't even read that. The actual conjunction yesterday. The fun thing was that I could actually, on astro.com, if you go to the daily chart, the chart of the moment, you can actually get degrees, minutes of arc, and seconds of arc for each planet or any particular planetary position. And I was following the Saturn-Pluto conjunction live-ish, and that was actually quite a bit of fun, because I'd seen it coming, and I have felt, I think, yes, over the past weeks, like a quite an intense pressure. What it was like, this conjunction for us, it was like you were hard at work all the time. And even when you were sitting on the couch watching, what is it? Wallace and Gromit, you know, basically, or some such, then coming out of the movie, again, there was this sense of pressure. It's a miracle I didn't have any headaches, really. Not really at that point. And it felt like you were getting somewhere also, but it felt like a lot of work. It was like a kind of tiring until last night, local time, the Netherlands, 6 o'clock in the evening, just a few minutes before 6, where the actual numbers for the degrees, I believe 22 degrees, 46 minutes of arc, and 34 seconds, I think. 34 seconds of an arc. So it's like, yay, for both Saturn and Pluto. They were conjunct. I actually did a screenshot, you know, which I sent on to people who don't really care about that stuff, but I think it's cool, you know, to be able to do that. And after that, very quickly, within like 5 or 10 minutes or so, I felt like, okay, God, that's over. Very strange. And the rest of the evening, we just went back to the telly and watched another movie. And after that, we went for a little walk because it was like 8:30 or so, and walked around the streets for a bit, for half an hour or so. And I said to husband, don't you feel like it's actually, and of course, if I relax, then he will relax, right? Because there's some level of tension that's going to go to disappear, you know, sometime through whatever reason or from whatever cause. But it feels like this, like it's like an increase in intensity the whole time towards this conjunction. And then at the point where the actual conjunction takes place, from then on outward, Saturn is moving beyond Pluto, right? I think what I saw this morning was like 51 minutes of an arc. So, you know, the next increment. And it was just, everything's just like, okay, from here on out, it's easier. It's like it's easier to handle somehow. So, yeah, I just wanted to share that with you. The conjunction experience, actually, because I'd been living towards that for like 2 months or so, and people have been talking about this stuff also online. So I thought it was interesting to just put this out there. Okay, so I'm going to wrap this up right now. Thank you for being here. I will be back this week, probably with maybe another summary of our vanished twin story as it is at this moment, because things have been happening on that end as well. It's a kind of a vibrational business. I've gone into this in my video of the 23rd of December in this last part, where it turns out that a man who has vanished twin syndrome, or who is a womb twin survivor, can very possibly carry around with him vibrations, energy, emotions that belong to his mum, as she was pregnant with him and his potential siblings. So I think that's a really interesting point to go into. Especially for people who are in this situation, of course. And I'm in a Facebook group of people who are in that in the Netherlands, and I'm going to go over there now to do a little type up of this thing that I've encountered. Hopefully it may serve people, because that's what we do. We just share, and then who knows, you know, maybe something comes out of it in somewhere in the world. Thank you for watching, and anywho, I will be back quite soon. Okay? Thank you. See you. Bye-bye.